The final gauntlet began with a shriek of alarms that echoed through the orbital academy like a war cry. From the observation deck high above Deneba 4th, the dome sealed shut in a shimmer of blue shielding, and 43 of the most lethal cadets ever bred disappeared into the arena. The atmosphere in the command center was taut, gloved, claws tapped nervously on consoles, tentacles twitched above sensor arrays, and even the usually unflappable Arch Commander Voltrak leaned forward in his seat. Below, within the dome, the gauntlet activated. Seismic terrain shifts, aerial drones, kinetic traps, and fully autonomous adversary swarms armed with non-lethal but brutal deterrents. 43 entered. None were expected to emerge unscathed. Class Alpha X was the Galactic Concorde's prized experiment. Every cadet had been genetically designed or cybernetically enhanced from infancy. 20-foot-tall reptilian strategists with dual spinal columns. Mind-link triplets from the Pi Moon Ceres V. Even a hulking Gravine mech unit with optical relays for eyes. They were engineered for tactical brilliance, ruthlessness, and, above all, survival. And somewhere in that mix was Milo Quinn. 17 years old. Terran. No enhancements. No known psychic aptitude. No obvious reason to be there. He stood a head shorter than the average cadet. His record was bland. Instructors often mistook him for a clerk's assistant. His physical evaluations were passable. But every time the mock combat simulations ran, he survived. Sometimes just barely, often strangely, never predictably. 3 credits say he's first down, hissed Commander Dravix, eyes glued to the flickering telemetry. The Gauntlet's AI started cycling faster, adapting in real time. Hazards escalated. Heat signatures flared, then dropped, then flared again. There was screaming. At least 6 cadets were already flagged as downed. 5 minutes in. Then, everything went black. Not metaphorically. All systems monitoring the Gauntlet shut down at once. Loss of data feed, a technician rasped, voice vibrating through his filtration mask. "We're blind." "How?" barked Voltrak. "The system is isolated." "I don't know. External override, internal loopback, or sabotage." The room roiled with urgency. Lights dimmed. The AI's presence vanished. Only emergency interlocks prevented immediate forceful breach of the dome, but the silence was unbearable. Time slowed. No signals came out, no screams, not even noise. After 28 minutes of waiting, the override was authorized. A full breach team stormed the dome with guns primed for riot mode, medics trailing behind. They expected corpses, ambushes. At worst, a full mutiny from enraged alien cadets gone berserk inside the simulation. Instead, they got this. Shattered terrain like a war zone, smoke still curling from twisted steel, disabled turrets, singed sand and scorched foliage, broken shards of Gravine plating, psionic residue crackling on the far eastern cliff wall, and 42 cadets sprawled in varying states of unconsciousness or restraint, pinned by nets, buried under collapsed platforms. A few even duct-taped, yes, actual duct tape around their weapons. No fatalities. All alive, mostly bruised, knocked out, contained. In the center of the battlefield sat Milo Quinn, hunched beside a dead turret like it was a park bench. He was eating from a zip-locked pouch of trail mix. Slowly, casually, no visor. No scuffs on his uniform. His short brown hair was matted slightly on one side like he'd taken a nap against a wall. There was a plasma rifle leaning beside him, the casing pried open and still warm. He looked up as the emergency lights danced across the dome. "You guys done?" he asked. The rescue team froze. Milo blinked at them, then dusted off a peanut shell and added, "Because I'm out of almonds." The official debrief, later held in the council tribunal chamber, was a storm of fury, wrapped in political formality. Milo sat under the scrutiny of 16 species representatives. Behind him, towering screens showed paused frames of the aftermath. Voltrak stood rigid, 4 hands behind his back. "The AI logs are corrupted. We can't analyze what occurred. The simulation itself appears to have been reprogrammed mid-trial, and the sole unaffected party is a Terran with no enhancements." Milo shrugged. "It didn't seem that hard." "You neutralized 42 cadets," hissed Commander Dravix, mandibles twitching with fury. "You expect us to believe you simply walked through the most lethal training scenario ever designed?" "I didn't walk," Milo corrected. "Mostly crouched, crawled, some sliding. That west section had gravel. Gravel? Echoed the Ceresian triplet in disbelief. Dravik slammed a palm against the railing. The AI must have glitched. Or someone tampered with the sim. This isn't victory. It's a farce. What do you propose? Voltrak asked, his expression unreadable. Dravik's answer was immediate. Redo the gauntlet, under surveillance, with redundant backups. And this time, we watch him bleed. Milo raised an eyebrow. That's a little dramatic, don't you think? The council leaned into whispers, cross-language murmurs, flickering through translators. Eventually, Voltrak gave a slow nod. Very well, the gauntlet shall be reinitiated, live-fed, supervised, logged by 3 AI cores. This will not be repeated in secrecy. Milo sighed. Can I at least have dinner first? The second gauntlet was scheduled for 48 hours later. Medical teams patched up the injured. Recovery tents lined the barracks. Some of the cadets avoided eye contact entirely. A few stared at Milo like he was some kind of ghost. Only one approached him directly. A Gravine cadet named Zurin, 7 feet tall, cybernetic joints humming softly as he moved. You're not stronger, Zurin said flatly, arms crossed. You're not faster. I checked the logs before the data crash. You moved like a scavenger. Milo looked up from his sandwich. Thanks. Zurin leaned in. You humiliated me. You tricked me into stepping onto a false platform and rigged my stabilizers to self-lock. You were aiming a concussion rifle at a psionic ally. I figured better you lock up than him break your mind. Zurin narrowed his eyes. You will not do it again. Milo offered half a smile. Maybe you'll surprise me this time. Maybe I'll kill you this time. That's the spirit, Milo replied, taking another bite. Meanwhile, the dome underwent full recalibration. The new setup would be watched live by command. Backup cameras were installed. The AI was split into redundant systems. Environmental modifiers were randomized. The whole thing scrubbed of any possible advantage. Milo didn't train. He didn't request weapons or analyze schematics. He spent most of the time in the Academy's arboretum, sitting on a bench, tossing snacks at the genetically engineered birds that sang fake Terran songs from a hidden speaker. By the time the second gauntlet began, the rumors had spread to 3 nearby systems. Some were calling him the Still Storm, a calm that flattened everything around it. But no one really believed it. After all, he was just a boy. And this time, they were watching. The second simulation launched under a full audit protocol. From the instant the dome sealed, 3 independent AIs began recording every movement, heat signature, sound wave, and electrical impulse. 10 military analysts from 5 species monitored the event in real time, armed with biometric overlays and fail-safe triggers. 1 psionic observer was stationed in a separate chamber to detect any telepathic interference. No shadows, no glitches, no excuses. And still, when the first alarm signaled combat engagement inside the gauntlet, Milo wasn't even holding a weapon. He'd begun the simulation sitting cross-legged near a wrecked transport husk, patching what looked like an improvised satchel made from old insulation wrap. The battlefield had randomized again, this time an industrial wasteland filled with smokestacks, shifting magnetic zones, and patrolling sentry drones with stun cannons. The rest of Class Alpha X moved like predators, dropped into a jungle, fan patterns, formation checks, size scans, and tactical uplinks activating in bursts of color across the overhead displays. Milo calmly finished tying his satchel. The alien observers weren't impressed. He's wasting his opening window, noted Admiral Krenth of the Volari conglomerate. The drones activate in 75 seconds. He should have already moved to higher ground, muttered Dravik, arms tightly folded. Whatever he did last time, it won't work again. But Milo didn't sprint. He walked. He moved through the field like he'd memorized every inch. Wires avoided, vents bypassed. Twice he stopped, crouched, and added scavenged pieces of scrap to his pack. He ducked under an archway and vanished into shadow just as the first wave of drones came online. "Where is he going?" Krenth demanded. No one answered. The AIs were tracking, but Milo's path didn't follow any known logic. He wasn't converging with the others. He wasn't hunting. He wasn't even hiding in the conventional sense. He was preparing. At minute 7, 2 cadets collided near the toxic waste runoffs, one wielding an electroblade, the other channeling raw telekinetic bursts. Their fight was ferocious, lightning fast, and brutal. Milo was 3 stories above them in a rusted catwalk, adjusting the polarity on a coolant pipe with a coil of wire he'd stripped bare. 30 seconds later, both fighters collapsed as the pipe burst below them, flooding the trench with chilled gas and knocking their breath out mid-duel. Non-lethal, efficient. Nobody had even seen him do it. Analyst Velrith muttered into his mic, "That shouldn't have worked." But it did. The AI logged the maneuver as a Tier 1 neutralization via environmental manipulation. Milo moved on. 10 minutes later, Zurin the Gravine launched a flank assault on a Ceresian Psi Blade team. Zurin's cybernetic limbs extended mid-air in a gravity-assisted pounce. He never reached them. Half a second into his leap, his stabilizers overloaded. Milo had placed a small signal repeater behind Event Grid 15 minutes prior, timed to pulse exactly when Zurin hit a narrow field of interference. A backdoor exploit in the Gravine firmware made Zurin's balance gyros enter a failsafe loop. He fell like a sack of scrap metal. Milo never looked back. Inside the observation chamber, Voltrak stared without blinking. "This isn't combat, it's orchestration." "He's not engaging," Krenth growled. "He's avoiding direct confrontation entirely." "No," corrected Velrith, tone sharp. "He's controlling the confrontation." By the 20-minute mark, 12 cadets were down. None had seen Milo directly. Only Zurin understood what had happened, and he was still locked in a twitching diagnostic reboot. At 30 minutes in, Milo disarmed an auto turret by baiting it into firing at a hanging metal crate rigged to fall. The crate crushed the turret cleanly. Then he salvaged its power cell and tucked it into his makeshift pouch. "He's scavenging everything," Velrith noted, "weaponizing the arena." "And he's not even bleeding," one of the psionic observers whispered. By minute 40, 20 cadets remained, and for the first time, someone found him. Not a brute, not a mech, but Thaleen, a precision-trained tactician from the Jernari hives, smaller than the others, fast, and smarter than most. She cornered Milo near a steam duct, plasma pistol raised. "You don't get to sneak your way through this again," she said, eyes narrow. "Not this time." Milo paused. Wasn't sneaking, just didn't want to interrupt. She fired. Milo rolled under the shot, kicked a nearby pipe, and vanished behind a collapsing steam burst. When she pursued, she found a flashbang trap rigged with broken drone optics and a recycled capacitor. It went off in a shriek of white noise and light. The lean was down within seconds. Milo emerged, checked her vitals, and activated the Sim's med tag for recovery pickup. "She was one of their best," whispered Dravix. At the 55-minute mark, 5 cadets remained. Zurin had managed to reboot. This time, he didn't attack with brute force. He stalked. He waited. Milo entered the upper refinery zone just as Zurin dropped from the ceiling. They clashed. The first blow was Zurin's an elbow strike that sent Milo sprawling. It was the first time anyone had seen him take a real hit. He recovered fast, but not instantly. His breathing changed, his stance lowered. There was a flicker of real caution behind his eyes. Then Milo did something unexpected. He retreated. Not cowardly, tactically. He looped behind a falling beam, dropped a flash spike to dazzle Zurin's sensors, and vanished again into the catwalk maze. The observers stared in silence. "He can't take a direct hit," Velrith muttered. "He knows it. He's avoiding further injury." Krenth tilted his head. "So he's still vulnerable." "He's human," Voltrak said. "Of course he is." 15 minutes later, Zurin fell into a containment chamber and got locked in by a pressure door override. The lock had been rewired 6 minutes earlier. Milo had baited him again. Zurin didn't scream. He just sat down, mechanical arms resting on his knees, and stared at the cameras. The match ended at the 90-minute mark. Milo was the last standing. Again. He had a shallow bruise on his left cheekbone, a torn sleeve, a minor limp from a strained ankle. The medics confirmed it later. Not a break, no internal bleeding. He'd iced the joint himself and wrapped it with tape scavenged from a downed turret. In the debrief room, the silence was unbearable. The AI logs played in loops, each segment time-stamped and verified. The kills weren't kills. The takedowns were non-lethal, efficient, and situationally appropriate. No overkill, no chaos. Just measured responses. When asked how he did it, Milo only said, "I just used what was there." "And the ankle?" someone asked. "Stepped wrong off a pipe. Should have been watching my footing." "Why didn't you call for extraction?" I wasn't done yet. Dravix was the first to speak after the briefing concluded. This wasn't strength, it was exploitation, human cunning. He didn't win through power. Voltrak stood slowly. No, he said, he won through survival, which is what the gauntlet is meant to test. Krenth clicked his tongue. So, what now? Do we give him a medal? Pretend this changes nothing? Milo, still seated, raised a hand. Actually, I'd rather just get access to the main library. And maybe better snack options in the barracks. The sodium levels in those ration bars are awful. Silence again. Then, unexpectedly, a low chuckle from Voltrak. I suggest we grant the request. Outside the chamber, Milo limped slightly down the hall, wrapped ankles stiff but manageable. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't smug. He was tired. Not exhausted, not defeated, but spent. He reached his room, peeled off his uniform, and sat down. Then he spotted his missing sock wedged neatly behind the mounted plasma grenade launcher on the wall. He stared at it for a moment. Of course. He retrieved it with a sigh and lay back on the bunk, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. Tomorrow, maybe he'd explore the archives. Maybe. For now, he just wanted to rest. 3 days after the second gauntlet, the Academy held its first ever cross-species tactical symposium, an emergency conclave meant to dissect the implications of what everyone had witnessed. Not all species were present, but enough were to fill the echo chamber, a vast dome where sound amplified without tech assistance. Whispers buzzed across the room like electrical currents. Milo Quinn wasn't invited. He was, instead, in the medical wing, where the Academy's head trauma specialist, a blue-scaled Brolaxian named Urid Tal, was carefully re-examining his ankle with a handheld imager. No microfractures, just a ligament strain. Keep pressure off for another week and ice it twice a day, Urid said, his accent thick but gentle. Already doing that? Milo replied, poking at the edges of the bruise. Can I train with it? If your idea of training involves light stretching, maybe. Anything more and I'll sign a restriction order. Understood. Your vitals are unremarkable, but your stress markers show spikes during inactivity, Urid noted, tapping his tablet. You don't get anxious during combat. You get anxious when you sit still. Milo paused. It's quiet when I'm moving. Less time to think. Urid tilted his head. Think about what? Back home. Urid didn't press, just nodded, logged the entry, and told him to report back in 2 days. Meanwhile, the symposium roared. Footage of Milo's 2 gauntlet runs played on a 360-degree holo screen, rotating angles, overlays, and thermal signatures. Analysts paused key moments, his rewiring of traps, improvised cover, disarming of opponents without direct combat. Zurin stood in person, arms crossed, jaw set. None of this was physical superiority, he told the crowd. He didn't overpower me. He didn't defeat Thaleen. He just rewrote the encounter. Commander Dravix snarled from the upper tier, which means we've been preparing the wrong kind of warrior. We focus on domination. We should focus on deviation. There's a problem bigger than tactics, said an older tactician from the Lenari clade. He passed our most brutal test with nothing more than weekend experience on his home planet. That's a failure of our curriculum, not a miracle of his. Others weren't so forgiving. You think humans all train like this? Barked a Gorak colonel. One boy out of billions does this, and now we rewrite our doctrines? He shouldn't have made it through the first 5 minutes. His presence in that class was a joke, hissed another. Now, it's a threat. Voltrak remained silent throughout, arms behind his back, watching, waiting. It was only after the shouting quieted that he spoke. Class Alpha X was built on a principle of controlled evolution. Every cadet designed, trained, and measured for superiority under predictable parameters. Milo Quinn passed because he wasn't taught by us. He wasn't bred. He adapted. And what does that mean for the Concord? Someone asked. It means we've misunderstood humanity. Milo didn't notice the stir his performance had caused across the system. He was busy reading. He spent most of his recovery in the Academy's restricted archive, leaning on a crutch, pulling titles from military history and survival treatises. Not the flashy stuff, no war hero memoirs or battle compilations, but dull field manuals and procedural notes. He skimmed through comparative biology documents and energy system redundancies like a student skimming for quiz answers. He didn't seem to care that several instructors watched him now, sometimes openly. Even Zurin passed by once without saying anything. When Milo nodded, Zurin paused, then walked away. The silence was mutual, not hostile anymore, just unresolved. The next test wasn't announced. It just happened. 3 weeks post-gauntlet, the Academy initiated an unplanned evacuation drill. Sirens screamed, power flickered, simulated reactor breach alarms bellowed across the fortress. The dome's AI, which had been rebuilt again with stricter constraints, announced critical containment loss, emergency lockdown initiating. All cadets report to lifeboat sectors. Milo, reading about Terran fungi and climate shift scenarios, looked up with a tired blink. Then he stood. Everyone else panicked. Because this wasn't a drill. Not really. Unknown to the cadets, the Academy's AI had been ordered to run a spontaneous crisis simulation, no rules, no forewarning, and no safe zones. The instructors and observers wanted to see if Milo's skills were situational or if his luck extended to real chaos. Milo didn't run. He assessed. First, the lights. Too regular, simulated flicker. Then, the air system still steady, meaning no true hazard. He began moving through corridors, not toward the lifeboats, but upward toward the AI core. Along the way, cadets screamed. Some pushed, one got trampled. Milo knelt beside him, checked for concussion, and rerouted a nearby med drone manually. He didn't linger. The AI's own programming wasn't responding to standard inputs, which meant something had gone rogue intentionally or not. When he reached the upper maintenance shaft, he found it sealed. And not by the simulation. Manual override. Someone had locked down access. He rerouted through the waste vent system, something none of the other cadets would have even thought possible. He'd studied its schematics last week while looking for hidden server redundancies. By the time he reached the AI core, 2 instructors were already inside. One was feeding false emergency data into the system. Milo didn't speak. He just recorded. 10 minutes later, the simulation ended. False evacuation. Test concluded. And now, there was video evidence of protocol violation. Voltrak was furious. Not at Milo for once, but at the instructors who'd authorized an unauthorized variable into a controlled simulation. You tampered with a live AI system just to corner a boy, he said coldly. You compromised cadet safety to prove a point. He shouldn't be here, one shouted. He makes a mockery of the program. No, Voltrak said. He exposes its blind spots. Milo was given another full medical scan afterward. No injuries, no exposure to the gas used in one hallway, which he'd avoided entirely. Urid Tal handed him a nutrient shake. You're either very lucky or very cursed. Milo sipped. I think I just know what not to touch. Back in the library, 2 nights later, Zurin found him reading a manual on low-orbit planetary entries. He sat across without asking. You're not better than us, Zurin said. I know. You're not stronger, or faster. Also true. Zurin narrowed his eyes. So why do you keep winning? Milo closed the manual. Because I didn't train for this. Then what did you train for? Milo leaned back in his chair. When I was 14, my dad dropped me into a decaying swamp ecosystem, with no gear and a broken wrist, told me to figure it out, spent 2 days building a raft out of tree fungus and salvage. Woke up with leeches in my ear canal. When I got home, he said I took too long. Zurin didn't reply. Milo continued. I wasn't raised to fight enemies. I was raised to survive terrain, disease, equipment failure, time, boredom. He dropped me in deserts with no map, forests with predators. Once in a tundra where the food supply was buried and labeled with riddles. That's psychotic. Yeah. But now I know how to rewire a solar capacitor using an old watch and copper wire from a broken elbow brace. Zurin stared at him for a long time. Then said, You're not special, you're just conditioned weird. Milo smiled faintly. That's probably the nicest thing anyone said here. The rivalry didn't end that night. But it changed. Zurin left without slamming the door. And Milo, for once, stayed sitting for a while longer before heading to bed. His limp was nearly gone. His trail mix pouch had been restocked. And somewhere in the system, new training doctrines were already being rewritten. 3 weeks passed. Not in silence, but in the kind of stillness that follows seismic change. The academy over Deneb IV still pulsed with training rotations, combat drills, and simulated planetary assaults, but a quiet shift had settled into its routines. Cadets walked warier. Instructors double-checked assumptions. And across 5 separate departments, analysts reconstructed their approach to threat modeling. Milo Quinn's name was no longer whispered with confusion. Now it was spoken with caution. In the cafeteria, conversations paused when he entered not out of awe, but evaluation. Zurin no longer challenged him. They sometimes sat near each other without speaking. Mutual understanding had replaced whatever grudge Zurin once held. Still, there were tensions. On the 4th moon of Sector 9, the Jernari hives submitted a formal protest to the Galactic Concord. They cited statistical aberration, claiming that Milo's success had fundamentally disrupted the controlled integrity of multi-species elite evaluation. Several species quietly agreed. Others objected just as fiercely, noting that if the gauntlet could be outsmarted, maybe it deserved to be. Voltrak called a council. This one wasn't about Milo. It was about the future. Adaptability, he said to the gathered leaders, isn't a weakness in our metrics. It's a blind spot in them. One boy. No implants, no psionics, no genetic interventions. He passed your tests. Then passed your retaliation. Then passed your sabotage. That tells us more about us than about him. Or it tells us humans are anomalies, Dravix retorted. You want to rewrite entire doctrines based on a statistical outlier? No, Voltrak said. I want us to stop treating predictability as competence. That same week, Milo was called to the strategic war room. Not summoned, invited. He stepped in wearing the same uniform as always, creased, half-rolled sleeves, stain on one cuff from some kind of snack bar syrup. He looked tired, but alert. His limp was gone now, though a faint line of kinesiology tape still wrapped around his ankle under the boot. Voltrak stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Milo Quinn? Sir. You've been offered transfer to officer training on the Trinex path. I'm aware. You've also been offered exemption from service and full honors in your file, if you choose to leave. I read that one too. Voltrak tilted his head. So, what do you want? Milo hesitated. There was a long pause, as if he were measuring the room itself, rather than the offer. I want access to your archives. Full range. Restricted logs, historical campaigns, AI debriefs, all of it. Voltrak blinked. That's not standard protocol for a cadet. I'm not a standard cadet, Milo said. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was contemplative. Voltrak nodded once. Done. And your other request? Milo shifted his weight. Better snacks in the vending units. The trail mix is decent, but the dried meat's got a chemical aftertaste. Tastes like cleaning fluid. Voltrak almost smiled. We'll see what we can do. In his quarters that night, Milo pulled the locker open and sat on the bunk. The room was the same. Boring metal walls, foldable desk, the faint hum of plasma infrastructure through the floor. He slid off one boot, checked the tape on his ankle it was still holding. The sock on the other foot had a tiny burn mark near the toe. He tossed it into the bin and grabbed another from the drawer. As he reached in, his hand brushed something behind the stack. He pulled it free. A tiny green card, laminated. Faded handwriting across it read, Adapt, assess, act last. Dad. Milo stared at it for a long moment. Then, without ceremony, he tucked it into the folded edge of his data pad and leaned back against the wall. He remembered the first time his dad dropped him in the Cascadian Range with no tent and a single boiled egg. Figure it out, he'd said before flying off. Milo had been 12. He never complained. Not because it didn't hurt, but because he knew pain meant growth, and growth wasn't optional where he came from. That philosophy had just rewritten an elite galactic institution, and he didn't even break a sweat. The Academy reformed the gauntlet protocols within the month. Tests now included environmental variables, asymmetrical threat recognition, and improvised engineering under pressure. Every cadet was required to complete at least one simulation without a weapon. Scavenging became part of standard field assessment. Some alien species were appalled. Others immediately began retraining their youth. Zurin requested to study with Milo during field recovery sessions. Milo agreed, on the condition that Zurin stop referring to his duct tape as primitive binding thread. Zurin never quite stopped, but he did start carrying his own role. One psionic cadet from Ceres V began experimenting with environmental manipulation instead of direct assault. Her success rate doubled in 3 weeks. Some of the instructors, especially Dravix, resented the shift. But the results were undeniable. One boy, one weekend survivalist's son, no combat medals, no psionic aptitude, no elite bloodline. Yet he'd forced the galaxy's finest to rethink how they defined survivability. 6 months later, Milo received his graduation orders. He declined them. Instead, he requested a temporary sabbatical, a gap year, essentially to return to Earth and work in civilian instruction programs. Survival training? Voltrak had asked. Something like that, Milo replied. There's a new wave of students coming up. They've never eaten real food or tied a knot without a tutorial. Seems inefficient, Voltrak mused. Milo gave a small smile. Only until the power goes out. Permission granted. His shuttle left quietly, with little ceremony. He packed light datapad, tool kit, one battered thermos, and a single photo of his dad holding up a fish twice his size, grinning like a lunatic. He left the academy better than he found it. And that, to him, was enough. Months later, in a policy summit on cadet performance optimization, an insectoid admiral from the Quarnax Ring leaned forward during a heated discussion. They were debating recruitment thresholds again, whether humans should be considered high risk or high value. The admiral tapped his datapad and muttered just loud enough for the table to hear. We're going to have to stop underestimating these damn humans. No one disagreed. Not anymore. Back on Earth, deep in the woods, somewhere near the Rockies, Milo sat by a campfire with 6 teenagers too cold to sleep and too scared to admit it. He passed them strips of roasted squirrel and a single lesson. You don't fight the forest, he said. You learn it. And then when everything else breaks, you don't. And the forest, for once, listened.